I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these, but here I am, sitting in a dark living room at 3 in the morning, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and wondering how my entire life unraveled in the span of a single Tuesday evening. They say betrayal doesn't come from your enemies, it comes from the people you take a bullet for. I used to think that phrase was just some edgy quote people posted online for attention, but now I know it's the absolute truth. It's a quiet, crushing weight that settles in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. My name is Mark, and until about 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a beautiful wife named Sarah, a decent job in tech marketing that paid the bills on our suburban home just outside of Austin, and a best friend named Tyler, whom I had known since our freshman year at Ohio State. We were the trio that everyone expected to grow old together, the ones who would be barbecuing in the backyard 20 years from now while our kids played on the lawn. Instead, I'm looking at a shattered house, a pile of divorce papers, and a level of anger that scares me every time I close my eyes. To understand how we got to that night, you have to understand the dynamic between the three of us. Tyler wasn't just a friend. He was my brother in every way that mattered. When my dad passed away 3 years ago, Tyler flew across the country without me even asking, showed up at my front door with a bottle of whiskey, and just sat with me in the silence. He was the charismatic one, the guy who could walk into any crowded bar and leave with 5 new friends and a phone number. But he was also reckless, especially with his finances and his relationships. While I was settling down with Sarah, buying a lawnmower and worrying about our 401k, Tyler was jumping from one sales job to another, living in expensive downtown apartments he couldn't afford, and dating girls who were wrong for him. Sarah always had a soft spot for him, viewing him as a sort of lovable, slightly broken project. She'd always make extra dinner when he stopped by, laugh at his ridiculous stories, and tell me how lucky I was to have a bond that deep. I loved her for that. I loved how welcoming she was, how her kindness seemed to expand to fit the people I cared about. Then came the winter of last year. Tyler's latest startup venture folded, his landlord raised the rent on his high-rise apartment by $600, and he found himself completely broke and facing eviction. He called me from a parking lot, his voice shaking, which was something I had never heard before. He was proud, too proud to ask for help usually, but he was backed into a corner. I didn't even hesitate. I told him he could pack his bags and come stay with us for a few weeks until he got back on his feet. When I told Sarah that night while we were making dinner, she was completely on board. Our guest bedroom was being used as a makeshift storage space, so we agreed he'd just crash on our massive sectional couch in the living room for the time being. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt like what an American suburbia success story does, helps out the old college buddy when the chips are down. The first couple of weeks were actually great. It felt like a prolonged college reunion. We'd watch the NBA playoffs on Thursdays, order pizza from the local spot down the street, and open a few beers. Tyler was respectful of our space, always cleaning up after himself and making sure he wasn't taking up too much room. But as the days bled into weeks and the weeks into months, the atmosphere in the house began to subtly shift. It wasn't anything loud or obvious at first. It was a slow, creeping change in the baseline energy of our home. I started noticing that whenever I came home from my 45-minute commute, Tyler and Sarah would be in the kitchen together, laughing over some inside joke they had shared during the afternoon. Sarah worked from home 3 days a week as a freelance graphic designer, and Tyler was spending his days applying for jobs from his laptop at our dining room table. They were spending 8 to 10 hours a day alone together in a quiet house, while I was stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the interstate or sitting in mind-numbing corporate meetings. I remember the first time a small knot of unease formed in my stomach. It was a Friday night, and we were all sitting around the kitchen island. I was exhausted from a brutal work week and was mostly staring at my phone, half listening to the conversation. Tyler was recounting a trip he and I took to Cabo back in our senior year, a story I had told Sarah a dozen times, but the way he told it made her light up. She was looking at him with this intense, uninterrupted focus, her chin resting on her hands, a genuine wide smile on her face. When I chimed in to correct a detail about the hotel we stayed at, Sarah brushed me off with a quick laugh, saying, "Let him finish, Mark. This is hilarious." It was a tiny moment, a fraction of a second, but it felt like I was an outsider in my own kitchen. I looked at my wife, the woman I had been married to for 4 years, and realized she hadn't looked at me with that kind of captivated energy in a very long time. Routine has a way of dulling the edges of romance, and I guess I had let myself believe that the comfortable silence we shared was enough. Seeing her react to Tyler was like a splash of ice water, but I forced the thought down. I scolded myself for being paranoid, for letting some pathetic, insecure jealousy ruin my relationship with my best friend and my wife. This was Tyler. This was Sarah. They loved me. They were just getting along, which was exactly what I had hoped would happen when he moved in. I didn't want a tense house where my wife resented my friend's presence, so I ignored the little warning signs. I ignored the way Sarah started dressing up a little nicer on the days she worked from home, trading her usual oversized sweatpants for flattering athleisure wear. I ignored how Tyler would eagerly volunteer to help her grocery shop or carry heavy packages from the porch. I ignored the lingering touches, the way his hand would brush hers when he handed her a coffee mug, or how close they stood next to each other when they were looking at something on her laptop screen. It all felt within the realm of casual, friendly behavior. It was a harmless romance of friendship, I told myself, a familiar comfort. The turning point started when my company announced a major regional conference in Dallas. It was a 3-day event, and as the senior marketing lead, my attendance wasn't optional. I had to pack a suit, prepare a presentation, and get ready for 72 hours of networking and client dinners. The night before I left, I felt an unstrange, heavy reluctance built up inside me. I was packing my suitcase in our bedroom, and Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me. She seemed quiet, almost distracted. I asked her if she was going to be okay with Tyler there while I was gone, and she gave a quick, almost too rapid assurance. "Of course, babe, don't worry about us. We'll just watch movies and stay out of each other's way." Tyler walked into the room a minute later, offering to drive me to the airport in the morning so I wouldn't have to pay for long-term parking. He clapped me on the shoulder, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Go crush it up there, man. I've got things covered here." I looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of malice or deceit, but all I saw was the same guy who had stood by my father's grave. I felt a wave of shame for ever doubting him. I hugged my wife, shook my friend's hand, and left the next morning at 5 a.m. The conference in Dallas was a blur of fluorescent lights, bad hotel coffee, and endless handshakes. My presentation went well, but my mind was constantly drifting back to Austin. I called Sarah every night, but our conversations felt strained, truncated. She claimed she was just tired from a heavy freelance workload, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. On the second night, when I called around 9 p.m., I could hear music playing softly in the background and the distinct clink of wine glasses. She told me Tyler had cooked dinner to thank her for letting him stay, and that they were just finishing up. There was a strange tightness in her tone, a subtle rush to get off the phone. "Have fun with your clients, Mark. Call me when you get to the airport tomorrow," she said before hanging up. I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out over the Dallas skyline, feeling a cold, hollow sensation opening up in my chest. The next day, Tuesday, the final panel concluded early. By 2 p.m., the closing remarks were finished, and I realized that if I caught a rideshare immediately, I could make an earlier flight back to Austin, instead of waiting for my scheduled 8 p.m. departure. I didn't text Sarah or Tyler. I wanted to surprise her, to walk through the front door, take her out to a nice dinner, and reclaim the rhythm of our life. I wanted to put an end to the ridiculous, poisonous thoughts that had been festering in my brain for the last 48 hours. The flight was short, barely 45 minutes. By the time I landed in Austin, grabbed an Uber, and pulled into our quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood, it was just past 6:30 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long amber shadows across the driveway. Tyler's old Honda Accord was parked on the street, and Sarah's SUV was in its usual spot. The house looked completely normal from the outside, the porch light already glowing against the twilight. I walked up the concrete path, my rolling suitcase clicking loudly against the ground, my heart beating with a strange, nervous anticipation. I unlocked the front door with my key, stepped inside into the quiet foyer, and dropped my bags. The house was dead silent, save for the faint, low murmur of a television coming from the back room. I smiled, thinking they were probably watching a show, and walked toward the living room, completely unaware that my life as I knew it was about to end. The silence in the house felt heavy, almost thick, as I stepped out of the foyer. I expected to hear the clattering of pans or the familiar sound of Sarah laughing at something Tyler said, but there was only that low, monotonous drone from the television in the den. I walked past the kitchen first. On the island, there were 2 half-empty wine glasses and an empty bottle of a heavy red blend that Sarah usually only opened for special occasions. Beside the glasses sat a small plate with the remnants of some cured meats and cheese, completely dried out at the edges, like it had been sitting there for hours. A strange, cold prickle of adrenaline hit the back of my neck. I couldn't explain why, but the sight of those 2 glasses standing side by side in the empty kitchen made me feel incredibly vulnerable. I called out, "Sarah? Tyler? I'm home early." No one answered. The only response was a shift in the audio coming from the TV, some old black and white movie playing on a loop. I moved down the short hallway that led toward our master bedroom and the guest bathroom. The door to the guest bathroom was open, the light off. But the door to our bedroom, which we almost always left cracked open so the central air could circulate, was completely shut. There was no light bleeding out from underneath the frame. I stood in the hallway for what felt like an eternity, my hand hovering over the brass doorknob. My mind was screaming at me to stop, telling me to turn around, walk out the front door, slam it loudly, and pretend I had just arrived. A terrifying, animalistic instinct was warning that whatever lay on the other side of that wood was going to alter the trajectory of my existence forever. I turned the knob. It didn't click. It turned smoothly, and the door swung inward without a sound. The blinds were drawn, shutting out the last remnants of the Texas twilight, leaving the room bathed in a deep, shadowy gloom. The only illumination came from the hallway light behind me, cutting a long, sharp rectangle across the carpet and onto the foot of our bed. And there they were. They weren't asleep. Tyler was sitting on the edge of the mattress, his back partially to me, his head lowered. Sarah was tangled in the sheets, her shoulders bare, looking up at him with an expression of intense, quiet vulnerability that I had never seen on her face before. Her hair was messy, sprawling across the pillows. The air in the room smelled heavily of her perfume, mixed with the faint, sharp scent of sweat and expensive cologne. In the fraction of a second it took for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a force that physically took my breath away. They weren't just hanging out. They hadn't just been watching a movie. My best friend, the man who had held my shoulder while my father was lowered into the dirt, was sitting in my bed with my wife. When the hallway light hit them, Tyler froze. His shoulders went rigid, and he slowly turned his head to look over his shoulder. When his eyes met mine, every ounce of color drained from his face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost, his mouth opening slightly, but no sound escaping. Sarah let out a sharp, choked gasp, instantly pulling the comforter up to her chin, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. For a long, agonizing moment, none of us moved. The universe seemed to stop expanding. The only sound was the distant, muffled dialogue of the television in the other room. "Mark," Tyler finally whispered, his voice cracking, sounding incredibly small. "Mark, man, it's not... Let me explain." Hearing him say my name broke the paralysis. A wave of heat rushed from my chest straight to my face, blinding me with a primitive, white-hot rage that I didn't know I was capable of possessing. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. The anger was too massive for that. It compressed into a tight, lethal focus. I stepped into the room, my boots heavy against the floorboards, and grabbed Tyler by the collar of his shirt before he could even stand up. I hauled him off the bed with a strength fueled entirely by adrenaline, slamming him hard against the drywall near the closet. A framed photo of Sarah and me on our wedding day rattled against the impact and crashed to the floor, the glass shattering into 100 pieces between our feet. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice dangerously low, vibrating with a tremor I couldn't control. "If you say one word, if you look at her, if you touch a single piece of your shit on the way out, I will ruin you." Tyler didn't fight back. He kept his hands raised, palms open, his eyes reflecting a pathetic mixture of guilt and fear. "I'm sorry, Mark. I'm so sorry. It just happened. We didn't mean to." I slammed him against the wall again, harder this time, the drywall groaning under his weight. "Do not speak to me. Do not look at me. Get your shoes, Get your keys and get the hell out of my life." He stumbled backward, losing his footing for a second on the shattered glass before scrambling toward the doorway. He didn't even grab his wallet or his jacket from the living room. He just ran out the front door in his socks and a t-shirt. A moment later, I heard the heavy thud of the front door slamming shut, followed by the frantic cranking of his car engine on the street outside. The tires screeched against the asphalt as he tore away into the suburban night, leaving a suffocating, violent silence in his wake. I turned slowly to face the bed. Sarah was trembling, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the blanket like a shield. She looked so small, so fragile, but looking at her didn't elicit an ounce of pity from me. The woman I had spent 7 years loving, the woman I had built a life with, looked like a complete stranger. "Mark, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling violently. "Please, talk to me. It was a mistake. It was the wine, and we were talking about how stressed you've been, and it just crossed the line tonight. It's never happened before. I swear to God, it was just tonight." Every word out of her mouth felt like a physical blow to my ribs. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was the realization that they had carved out a hidden world together inside my own home. They had used my absence, my trust, and my generosity as a playground. I looked at the bed we had picked out together at a local furniture store, the sheets she had washed over the weekend, and the space where I was supposed to sleep tonight. The sanctity of my home was entirely gone, replaced by a cheap, dirty theater of deception. "How long?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion now. The rage had burned out, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape of shock. "Just tonight, Mark, I swear," she cried, reaching a hand out toward me, but pulling it back when she saw the look in my eyes. "We were just drinking and talking, and he told me how much he admired you, and then he looked at me, and I don't know what happened. I lost my mind. Please, Mark, you have to believe me." I looked down at the shattered wedding photo near my boots. Our smiling faces looked back at me through the cracked glass, a snapshot of a day when everything felt permanent and safe. I realized then that the woman in that photo didn't exist anymore, and neither did the man standing over it. I didn't answer her. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her rationalizations, or her lies. I walked out of the bedroom, leaving her crying in the dark, and walked into the living room. The sectional couch where Tyler had been sleeping for the past 2 months was messy, a blanket tossed carelessly over the armrest. I grabbed his laptop from the dining room table, his spare car keys from the counter, and his leather jacket from the coat rack. I walked to the front door, opened it, and hurled his belongings out onto the front lawn, into the dark grass. Then I sat down on the bottom step of our staircase in the foyer, staring at the front door, listening to the muffled sounds of my wife weeping in our bedroom, wondering how a person survives the night when their entire world has just been turned to ash. I sat on that bottom step for hours, watching the shadows from the street lamp outside shift across the foyer wall. The weeping from the bedroom eventually stopped, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that felt even worse. My phone kept buzzing in my pocket, short, frantic vibrations that I knew were from Tyler or Sarah trying to text me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the screen. The device felt like a radioactive brick against my thigh. Every time I blinked, the image of them in the dim light of our bedroom burned itself into the back of my eyelids. I found myself focusing on the absurd details. The way the comforter was bunched up, the smell of her perfume, the terrified look on Tyler's face. It's strange how the human brain handles trauma. It doesn't process the massive, life-altering reality all at once. Instead, it fixates on the tiny, insignificant pieces of the wreckage. Around 4 a.m., I heard the bedroom door creak open. I didn't turn my head, but I heard her soft, hesitant footsteps clicking against the hardwood floor of the hallway. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen, just a few feet away from where I sat. She had changed into a pair of sweatpants and an old t-shirt of mine, a shirt she had stolen from my closet years ago that had become her favorite thing to sleep in. Seeing her wear it right now felt like a cruel joke, a mockery of the intimacy we used to share. "Mark?" she whispered, her voice raw and completely hollowed out from crying. "Are you going to come to bed? Please don't sit out here like this. Talk to me. Yell at me, scream at me, do something. Just don't do this. I slowly stood up, my joints stiff from sitting on the hardwood for so long. I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel that blinding, explosive rage. I just felt an overwhelming, bone-deep exhaustion. She flinched as if I had physically struck her. "Mark, no, please. This is our home. We can fix this. People get through things like this. We can go to therapy. We can talk about it. I made a horrible, disgusting mistake, but I love you. I've only ever loved you." "If you loved me, Tyler wouldn't have been in our bed," I said, the words cutting through the air with a cold, surgical precision. "You didn't just make a mistake, Sarah. You chose to sit in the kitchen and drink wine with him. You chose to let him follow you into our room. You chose to take your clothes off. A mistake is dropping a glass on the floor. What you did was a series of deliberate choices while I was in another city working to pay the mortgage on this house." She reached out to grab my arm, her fingers trembling, but I stepped back, out of her reach. The rejection made her fresh tears spill over, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. "He was just there, Mark. He was always there. You were working late every night. You were stressed. You were checked out. I was lonely, and he was listening to me. He was paying attention to me. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I swear to God I didn't." Hearing her try to shift the blame, even a fraction of it, onto my work schedule or my stress levels, felt like a second betrayal. It was the classic script of a cheater, the desperate attempt to rewrite the history of our marriage to justify the unjustifiable. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that the foundation of trust we had built over 7 years wasn't just damaged, it was entirely pulverized. There was nothing left to salvage. "I need you to leave," I said, turning away from her and walking toward the living room. "Call your mom, call a friend, I don't care. Just pack a bag and be out of this house by the time the sun comes up." I didn't wait around to watch her pack. I grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter, walked past the shattered wedding photos still lying on the floor, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The neighborhood was dead quiet, the sky a dark, bruised shade of purple just before dawn. Down on the front lawn, Tyler's laptop and leather jacket were still lying in the grass, damp with the morning dew. I walked past them without a second glance, got into my truck, and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just drove through the empty streets of the Austin suburbs, watching the streetlights flicker off one by one as the sky began to lighten. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on the side of the highway, sitting in a vinyl booth under flickering fluorescent lights, staring into a mug of black coffee that I didn't drink. My phone was on the table in front of me, and it finally stopped buzzing. When I pulled up the screen, I had 14 missed calls from Tyler and 27 texts from Sarah. I opened Tyler's messages first. It was a pathetic stream of consciousness. "Mark, please call me." "Man, I am so incredibly sorry. It's not what it looks like. Please don't do anything crazy. I hate myself. I'm at a motel off I-35. Please let me talk to you." I stared at the words, feeling a profound sense of disgust. This was the guy who knew every single one of my secrets, the guy who knew how much I loved my wife, the guy I had given a roof over his head when he had nowhere else to go. The sheer entitlement of his betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just stolen my wife, he had stolen my history, my memories of college, my support system when my dad died. He had erased the value of a 15-year friendship in a single night of selfishness. I blocked his number. I didn't type out a response. I didn't send a threatening message. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing he had broken me. I just blocked him, cutting him out of my existence like a cancerous tumor. Next, I looked at Sarah's texts. They were long, frantic blocks of texts filled with apologies, declarations of love, and begs for forgiveness. The last one, sent about 30 minutes prior, simply said, "I'm leaving. I'm going to stay at my sister's house in Round Rock. Please call me when you're ready to talk. I love you so much, Mark." I sat in that diner until the sun was fully up, watching the morning rush hour traffic build up on the highway outside. People were rushing to work, listening to the radio, drinking their coffees, entirely unaware that a mile away, a man's life had just completely collapsed. I felt completely detached from reality, like I was watching my own life through a foggy window. When I finally drove back to the house around 9 a.m., Sarah's SUV was gone from the driveway. The front door was locked, and when I walked inside, the house felt completely dead. The air was stagnant, holding on to the remnants of the previous night's trauma. I walked into the master bedroom. She had packed a couple of large suitcases. Her closet door was wide open, with empty hangers dangling from the rod like skeletal fingers. But she had left something on the nightstand. It was her wedding ring, sitting on top of a small handwritten note. I picked up the piece of paper, my hands shaking slightly. It read, "I don't know how to fix this, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying if you let me. I left my ring because I don't deserve to wear it right now. Please don't give up on us." I stared at the platinum band, remembering the day I bought it, how nervous I had been, how much overtime I had worked to afford the specific diamond she wanted. It had been a symbol of a promise. Now it was just a piece of metal, sitting on a piece of paper in an empty room. I dropped the ring into my pocket, walked out of the room, and closed the door behind me. I knew what I had to do next, but the thought of it made me feel physically sick. I had to call a lawyer, and I had to figure out how to tell my family that the life we all thought I was living was completely a lie. The next few weeks passed in a blur of gray, agonizing monotony. I hired a divorce attorney named Robert, a sharp, no-nonsense guy whose office downtown smelled of old leather and expensive stationery. Sitting across from him, laying out the details of my marriage and the events of that Tuesday night felt like an out-of-body experience. He took notes with a heavy fountain pen, his expression entirely neutral, as if he heard this exact story 5 times a week, which in reality he probably did. He told me that Texas is a no-fault divorce state, but that we could file on the grounds of cruelty or adultery if I wanted to push the issue. I told him I didn't care about making a public spectacle of them. I just wanted it over with. I wanted my name scrubbed from hers, my assets separated, and the house sold as quickly as humanly possible. I couldn't stand the thought of living in that space anymore, but I also refused to let her keep it. Sarah tried to contact me through every channel she had left. Since I had blocked her number, she started emailing my work account, sending long, desperate paragraphs detailing her remorse. She told me she had started seeing a therapist in Round Rock, that she was uncovering why she felt so insecure and lonely, and that she desperately wanted to show me she could change. I never replied. I forwarded every single email to Robert's assistant to be filed away with our case documents. Tyler tried to reach out too once, using a burner number to leave a voicemail. His voice sounded pathetic, shaky, and full of tears, begging me to meet him at a diner just to let him apologize to my face so he could sleep at night. I deleted the voicemail before it even finished playing. Their guilt was their own cross to bear. I had no intention of granting them the closure they needed to feel better about what they had done. The hardest part was telling my family. Calling my mother and explaining that Sarah and I were splitting up because of Tyler was one of the most painful moments of my life. My mother loved Sarah like a daughter, and she had treated Tyler like a second son for over a decade. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the quiet, choked-up sound of her crying for me. My older brother, textbook aggressive, wanted to drive down from Dallas to find Tyler himself, but I talked him down. I told him that hitting Tyler wouldn't undo the image in my head, nor would it fix my marriage. It would just add a legal mess to an already unbearable emotional disaster. 2 months after that fateful night, The temporary orders were signed, and the house went on the market. Packing up 7 years of a shared life into cardboard boxes is a specific kind of torture. Every closet yielded a memory, a ticket stub from a concert we went to in Austin, a framed art print we bought on our honeymoon in Savannah, a set of golf clubs Tyler had left in the garage that I promptly threw into the dumpster behind the local grocery store. Sarah came by with her sister one afternoon while I was at work to collect the rest of her clothes and furniture. When I came home that evening, the house was half empty, the walls bare where our pictures used to hang, leaving behind clean rectangular shapes on the paint where the dust hadn't settled. It looked less like a home and more like a stage set after the play had finished and the actors had moved on. The final court date was handled mostly through our attorneys, a quiet, administrative end to a relationship that had once felt grand and infinite. We signed the papers in a sterile conference room, the air conditioning clicking loudly in the background. Sarah looked pale, with dark circles under her eyes, her posture slumped. She tried to make eye contact with me across the table, her eyes pleading for some sign of softness, some crack in the armor I had built around myself. I kept my gaze fixed on the documents, signing my name on the dotted line with a steady, unhurried hand. When it was over, she stood up and whispered, "I'm so sorry for everything, Mark. I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I just nodded once, picked up my briefcase, and walked out into the bright Texas sunshine without looking back. It's been 6 months now since that Tuesday night. The house sold and the profits were split down the middle. I took my share and moved into a modern, minimalist apartment downtown, high enough up that the traffic on the street below sounds like a distant ocean. It's a clean space, completely free of the past. There are no memories attached to these walls, no ghosts lurking in the corners of the bedroom. I've thrown myself into my work, picking up extra projects and running miles around Lady Bird Lake until my lungs burn and my muscles ache too much for my brain to think. I ran into an old college friend last week at a coffee shop, someone who still occasionally saw Tyler around town. He told me, hesitantly, that Tyler and Sarah had tried to make an actual relationship work after the divorce, as if trying to validate the destruction they had caused by turning it into a grand romance. But according to him, it had imploded spectacularly within 2 months. The guilt, the mutual paranoia that if they could cheat with each other, they would cheat on each other, and the weight of the social fallout had poisoned them. Tyler had apparently moved out of state to a sales job in Phoenix, and Sarah was living alone in a small apartment, completely isolated from our old friend group. Hearing that didn't bring me the wave of vindictive satisfaction I thought it would. It just felt empty. There was no joy in knowing they were miserable, because their misery didn't undo the damage. It didn't give me back the years I invested, the trust I lost, or the best friend I thought I had. But I'm surviving. The heavy, suffocating weight in my chest has started to lift, replaced by a quiet, cautious resilience. I'm learning to navigate the world as an individual again, rather than as part of a pair. Trust is going to take a very long time to rebuild. The thought of letting someone else into my life, of showing them my vulnerabilities, still feels terrifying, but I know I'll get there eventually. The scars are permanent, a constant reminder of the night my harmless life crossed a line I didn't even know was there, but they are also proof that I survived the crash. I pour myself a glass of water, walk out onto my balcony, and look out over the city lights, finally realizing that the story isn't about how they broke me. It's about how I'm putting myself back together.